Welcome back to the ISS RDC virtual conference. We have for you now the LEO commercialization panel, where LEO is low Earth orbit. There is a robust and competitive low Earth orbit economy that is vital to continued progress in space. In order to bring that economy to fruition, remaining flexible and willing to adjust to the incredibly dynamic environment is absolutely crucial. Recently, NASA has done just that, and we're excited to bring to you our next panel, the very people who will be spearheading these new efforts to tell us more about NASA's broad commercialization plans. I'll take a few moments to introduce our three panelists this morning. Philip McAlister joined NASA in 2005 and currently serves as director of the Commercial Spaceflight Division at NASA headquarters, where he advises NASA on issues pertaining to the design, development, demonstration, and services of commercial spaceflight vehicles, systems, and capabilities. Phil oversees multiple programs at NASA, including Commercial Crew Program, suborbital crew projects, low Earth orbit commercialization, including private astronaut missions, and the Center for the Advancement of Science in Space. Prior to this assignment, Phil oversaw the successful commercial cargo program, known to some of you as COTS, which facilitated the development of the SpaceX Dragon and Orbital Sciences Antares cargo transportation systems. Prior to NASA, Phil was a director at Futron Corporation, where he managed a division that performed aerospace business analysis and technological assessments. Joining Phil McAlister today is Robyn Gatens. Robyn is the acting director of the International Space Station Division in the Human Exploration and Operations Mission Directorate at NASA headquarters. In addition, Robyn serves as the agency's systems capability lead for environmental control and life support, as well as crew health and performance systems. Get ready for it. Here's a new acronym, ECLSS-CHIP, where she leads a team of system-specific subject matter experts from across the agency. Robyn has 35 years of experience at NASA in both the International Space Station and in the development and management of the life support and other habitation systems for human spaceflight missions. Robyn has led agency strategic and budget planning to mature the habitation system technologies needed for future deep space exploration missions, using the ISS as a demonstration testbed. As part of her role as acting ISS director, Robyn is engaged in NASA's strategic planning to leverage the ISS to secure an ongoing U.S. presence in low Earth orbit by enabling a successful and long-term private sector LEO space economy. Last but certainly not least, we are joined on the panel by Angela Hart, who was recently named the LEO Commercialization Manager at NASA. Previously, Angela served as manager of the Mission Management and Integration Office at NASA's Commercial Crew Program, CCP, at NASA's Johnson Space Center in Houston. She was responsible for all aspects of mission integration, scheduling, mission-specific analysis, and manifesting of payloads. Angela began her NASA career at Johnson Space Center in 1996, leading pressurized cargo integration planning for the ISS program. In 2007, Hart moved to the Orion program at Johnson Space Center, managing the vehicle flight and ground operations team. 2 years later, Angela became the SpaceX contracting officer, technical representative for the commercial resupply service contract, and also served as the vehicle integration manager for the company. Angela then took the role of International Space Station Commercial Crew Integration Manager, where she worked closely with both SpaceX and Boeing Commercial Crew Program partners. Angela served for 7 years in the United States Army as a Hawk Missile Air Defense Artillery and Military Intelligence Officer, attaining the rank of captain. She transitioned from her finer military position serving as an intelligence analyst for the Texas National Guard Counter-Drug Task Force to become criminal investigator for the US FDA before joining NASA. Thank you so much for joining us today. I turn it over to Phil, Robyn, and Angela.
Okay, thanks. I think it's my turn to start. Welcome, everybody. It's really kind of cool for me to be back here. I heard a snippet of Kathy's presentation, and she was sort of waxing nostalgically, and I will do the same for a moment. I was actually at the very first one of these it wasn't actually the R&D conference. There was a precursor to this R&D conference. I think we called it the ISS Utilization Conference. And I believe, if my memory serves correctly, it was about 1995 or 96. It was the very first one. And Dan Golden was the keynote speaker, obviously. And I remember Dan asked the audience to stand. He said, if you're a government contractor, please stand up. And of course, a whole slew of people stood up. It was actually the majority of the room. If you're a NASA employee or a civil servant, please stand up. And it was smaller, but still a pretty good chunk of the room. And he said, well, how many of you are actually researchers? And a very few, I would say probably like 10 maybe stood up. And he challenged the room, and he said, well, I hope when I come back here next year or the year after that those numbers will be inverted. I'd really like to do that experiment today. We're now 25 years later. I wish we were all in a room, and I would do the same thing. Maybe I'll look at the participant list, and hopefully we have the majority of actual users and researchers in this conference, as opposed to just support staff and civil servants and bureaucrats like myself. But anyway, it is really good to be back. Obviously, I've been thinking about these kinds of issues for a long time, so it's really gratifying for me to be in a position where I can implement some of those ideas and some of the experiences, put them to use with the Commercial Crew Program and what I did before that on the International Space Station. So with that, I will go to a couple of my slides. That's me. Okay, when I think about the foundation of commercialization or LEOCOM, these are some of the things that you heard from Administrator Bridenstine. It is now the policy of the United States to achieve a continuous U.S. presence in LEO. We have not had that before. That is in a document to the National Space Council that NASA wrote jointly with the Department of Commerce and FAA, and that is also in NASA's strategic plan to have a continuous U.S. presence in LEO. Also, we've gotten support from the Congress. This was from the Transition Act, the NASA Authorization Act, where they directed us to go towards an orderly transition for U.S. human spaceflight activities in LEO from the current regime that relies heavily on NASA sponsorship to a regime where NASA is one of many customers. I'm sure you've heard that phrase many times before. And as we know, and as the administrator mentioned, it isn't possible for the ISS to operate indefinitely. It's going great. She's a great spacecraft, and we hope it'll continue to serve us well. But it won't last forever. It could have an unrecoverable contingency at any time, jeopardizing our policy goal of having a U.S. presence continuous. And also, as the administrator has said many times, that the next LEO platforms are not going to be government owned and operated. So when I think about LEOCOM, that is really the foundation by which everything else that we are doing. And so when I think about everything else that we're doing, Kathy challenged me. She's like, Phil, I want to see how it all fits together. And so that's this next slide. And there's a lot on this slide. And so I'll take it piece by piece. If you go up to the top right now, we are in really good shape with the International Space Station, and we intend to operate that as long as it is safe and productive. Actually, NASA doesn't have a say in how long the ISS is going to last or be operational. That is up to our stakeholders in Congress and the administration. So I don't actually have an opinion on that. But my opinion is we got to be ready when we do cease operations on ISS to have commercial platforms operational. So at some point in the future, we are going to incrementally phase down ISS operations. Right now, we don't have any commercial destinations in space. And so we're going to be, for the next several years, working on developing those systems. So you see that line called development. And you see that as in the far term, as we start to ramp down ISS ops, we're going to ramp up commercial ops. So it's not going to be a turn the light switch kind of situation. It will be very incremental. And what we're trying to get to is in the farmost right-hand part of the screen, where it says the end goal, sustainable commercial operations, where we have multiple commercial providers and multiple commercial customers. So how do we get there? So then you got to go back to the left. In any marketplace, you have to have supply and demand. Both of those things have to be sort of in balance. And so if you look at supply, we've earlier this year, we awarded the port module contract to Axiom, and they are underway. However, we want to use competition. With all of our commercial programs, Commercial Crew, with Commercial Cargo, we had 3 partners. Rocket Plane Kistler was dropped, and so we ended up with, at that time, Orbital Sciences and SpaceX. And with Commercial Crew, if you remember the very first set of Space Act agreements we signed, there were 5 partners in CCDEV-1. And I have seen the power of competition. It is amazing. It's not just for cost, but they compete on safety, they compete on performance, and you get a much, much better product in the end. So we want to have and intend to have competition, not only throughout the development phase, but also through operations. We do want to have more than one platform when we get there. So we definitely want to do a free flyer acquisition. We're kind of still in we're working on that now. I can't promise any specific timelines associated with that, but we are definitely working on the free flyer and intend to release a solicitation soon on that once we get our strategy all agreed to internally to NASA. And then on the demand side, I think we're doing quite a lot. We have awarded a number of demand stimulation awards covering in-space manufacturing, regenerative medicine, and a lot of other places. We have just opened up the ISS for more commercial use. We have set aside 5% of ISS resources for commercial and marketing activities. Obviously, CASIS is the key part of our demand, doing science, applied R&D, tech development, education, and hopefully soon private astronaut missions, where we can sort of prime the pump for tourism and other activities. And then we've always got NASA's sort of anchor tenancy, which I call it, which is our ongoing LEO requirements. I think we are always going to have requirements for low Earth orbit microgravity services, whether that be human research, crew accommodations, tech development, things like that. And all those are going to sort of mash together in this transition period. And you see I've got some gold tick marks because we are going to have to monitor the success of that. Are the free flyers maturing? Is the non-government demand maturing sufficiently so that we can have confidence to ramp down ISS operations and that we can eventually get to that end goal of sustainable commercial operations? And then if you look at the very bottom, I personally feel like we have a great opportunity about the mid part of this decade. We are going to have to recompete both the cargo and the crew contracts. And in every analysis we have done, every study, has identified that transportation costs, the high transportation costs, are a drag or an impediment to commercial operations. And so as we go through with those recompetes, I am going to really push hard for us to reduce those transportation costs. That's going to be a real goal for NASA. Obviously, we're going to have to meet our requirements, but in the recompetes, we want those costs to come down, not only for our benefit, but to also hopefully attain the sustainable commercial operations all the way on the right-hand goal. So what am I going to do differently? Now that I have some management oversight over this, our strategy is to, in my opinion, we have to have safe, reliable, and cost-effective free flyer platforms that are privately owned and operated. And I think that needs to be the focus of our near-term commercialization strategy, or all the other things that you saw on that chart will never be realized. There'll be no place to go for all those demand things that we are doing if there is no platform once the ISS retires. All those other things that I showed, demand stimulation, commercial use cases, all those things are super important, and we're going to continue those. Those are vital parts of our strategy. But in my opinion, we have to really focus on getting free flyer platforms operational, safe, reliable, and operational as soon as possible. So that is going to be a real focus of mine, while also keeping our eye on the ball on all these other aspects of these. And the thing that I have learned in overseeing both crew and cargo is they take longer than you want or longer than you expect. So we have to get going now. Obviously, we've got some budget challenges. This year, we only got $15 million. That doesn't enable a whole lot of spacecraft development. So we need to do a better job there in telling our story. And that is another focus of mine going forward in the near term. Okay, that's the end of my slides, and I'll turn it over to my good colleague, Robyn Gatens.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be back with this conference this year. I've participated for a number of years as well, and it's interesting being virtual instead of in person, but I'm really happy that we were able to put it on. I know we're a little bit limited on time, so I want to get through my material and give Angela a turn to speak. And I always like to start off with the overall mission of the International Space Station. And the administrator and Kathy touched on these, but these are just really important that we all keep in mind this incredible platform and what we're trying to achieve here and trying to get help it reach its full potential before we do transition eventually to these low Earth orbit commercial services. So it's a basis for our international and commercial exploration partnerships. We're using it to enable long-duration human spaceflight beyond low Earth orbit, and this is near and dear to my heart with my other hat that I wear, developing life support and crew health systems. We're definitely using this as a platform to test those systems. And then all the wonderful research that you've already heard some about and we'll hear more about later today, returning benefits to humanity. But we're here to talk about the fourth one, and that's how are we using the space station to facilitate the development of this commercial market in low Earth orbit. And pretty much a lot of the paths that Phil just mentioned on his roadmap run through the International Space Station today. So it's a critical part, and we are joined at the hip in partnering together to use the space station to enable these commercial platforms and services, and so that we can transition to those. This is another slide that just shows the continuum. I'd like to think about the continuum between the International Space Station and our future in space beyond LEO, and how our commercial partnerships and international partnerships are already enabling that. You see our cargo vehicles at the bottom there. Kathy mentioned we're bringing on some new capabilities there. And then the brand new crew transportation capabilities that have already been touched on, very exciting, and it's going to really help us open up these new markets. I wanted to touch on, we think about big platforms, and those are really important, but we also, inside the platform, or I like to talk about the mall, if you will, there are stores, there are facilities, there are individual capabilities. And so we have a number of those, and those number of those have been growing over the years inside the space station. So we've had a number of commercial facilities that our implementation partners and others have flown. And some examples of those are on the next slide here. We've got additive manufacturing, we've got space biology platforms, bioprinting. We're looking forward to the NanoRacks commercial airlock coming aboard next year, and just a number of facilities that we're already using. And so when you think about, as we transition from, I like to think about NASA just doesn't want to be a tenant with its own store in the mall, but we want to share each individual store, if you will. How can we use these commercial facilities jointly together so NASA's not building our own very unique facilities, but buying services from each individual commercial facility as well? So that's important as we think about this transition along the way. And then Phil touched on this. This is our new expanded commercial use policy, where we created a wedge of about 5% of our resources for upmass, crew time, and the like, to fly the things on the space station that we previously could not enable through the National Lab, through a subsidized resource. These services are for sale for purely commercial use, and we have enabled that through policy. We've already flown some of those and have a number of interested entities interested in using that, and want to really promote that further through this venue. If there are folks out there that want to take advantage of our commercial use policy, there'll be a website at the end of this presentation to give you the link for how to contact us and how to propose those activities. And then finally, we're looking forward to enabling this commercial element coming on board Space Station and attaching to the Node 2 forward port. And I think Angela's going to talk more about this. I want to give her some time, so I will stop here and turn it over to Angela. Thank you.
Hey, good morning. Angela Hart here. Thank you. This is my second time coming to the conference and first time being on a panel, so I'm really excited to be here. I'm going to move through these slides just real quick because I do want to give folks a chance to have some questions and answer time period before we run out of time here. So Phil kind of already mentioned this, that, you know, there's a number of components to get to that LEO economy that we need to have established in order to have a robust economy able to keep those free flyers flying so that both NASA and the research community, along with others, and can buy services when ISS is at end of life. And so that whole strategy that Phil talked about is very important to my new office that's pulling together kind of the tactical plan on how we'll get there. And so just wanted to talk about a few things that have been out there. Many of you may know these, you may not. But in order to enable the commercialization of LEO, we have under Next Step 2 broad agency announcement last year have done a number of things that we're continuing to work on. Under Appendix I, Robyn already mentioned that we did do a solicitation for a commercial destination in LEO, and we awarded a contract to Axiom Space. Their proposal had 4 modules that they will comprise their commercial segment. It'll start out as a platform attached to the ISS, and then eventually has the opportunity to become a free flyer. This concept will is the first stage in talking about those free flyers, and I'll talk about a little bit more about free flyers. That is that prime requirement that Phil is really working on to make sure that we can really have that next platform available when another appendix that was put out, opportunities that you guys may be very interested in, opportunities to stimulate demand in LEO through applied research. 8 contracts were awarded in this area, and I'll talk about those in a minute a little bit more. This is very important, and these were just awarded and then kicking off this year, and then will span over the next 3 years. So that's really important, I think, for demand stimulation, stimulating that demand and really having folks that want to continue to use low Earth orbit as ISS retires is very important to that economy. And so we are definitely continuing to work demand stimulation. It's a priority along with free flyers, as Phil noted, but most of you, I think, are really involved in the demand stimulation area and want to make sure that NASA is there and really willing to support this area. And I want you to know that our office does that. Appendix K, which was also discussed last year, commercial destinations development in LEO free flyer. This is what Phil had talked about. This did not get put out. We did have some initial RFI discussions on this, but it has not been put out, and we are re-evaluating how we want to do that solicitation. It's still a very important part of that overall strategy, and so we will be doing that in the future. But at this time, we will not be moving forward with Appendix K, and we'll keep you guys posted on what the next steps on that are. Stimulating, I really want to spend most time talking about demand because I think most of the folks in the audience are really interested in this topic. We did provide some seed money to enable selected companies to mature their concepts and stimulate demand to develop future markets in space. As I mentioned, 8 companies were awarded. These are the list of companies here. Apsidol, which is going to be looking at a manufacturing model for universal glass optics. D-Star Communications, also fiber manufacturing for thin metal coated optical fibers. Made in Space is looking at manufacturing machines for glass alloy. They are also looking at semiconductor chip facility that they want to fly. Space Tango and Cedars-Sinai are looking at the production of stem cells for personalized medicine applications, as well as Space Tango in coordination with Lambda Vision is looking at protein-based retinal implant manufacturing. And then also Space Tango and UC San Diego and Sanford Consortium are looking at regenerative medicine laboratory. And then last is Bryce Space and Technology that helped put together an action plan for us to look at for barriers to entry to low orbit markets. So this was a study that has been completed, and we are evaluating the results of that and how we can move forward to help more demand stimulation in the future. Very exciting stuff. All of these areas, human research, technology demonstrations, career accommodations and training, science, physical and biological research, and then the continuation of the National Lab services are all what we're looking at for future LEO demand, and working really hard to keep moving abreast and having a place for that market after ISS retirement. Last item I want to talk a little bit is, you may have been hearing a little bit in the media, is private astronaut missions. In June of 2019, NASA released a new focus area under the ISS Utilization NRA to help enable private astronaut missions. So we talked about demand a little, we talked about destinations, and now we're really talking about how to get that market and combine the two. So we've received a number of proposals after releasing that focus area from a number of companies interested in executing PAMs. As part of my new office, we will be developing a LEO commercialization panel, which will process these proposals and evaluate funding so that we can move forward on these. We already have SpaceX agreements with a number of companies in place to help them continue their mission concepts and get ready for an execution proposal. And we actually have 2 mission-specific proposals that are under evaluation today for the first potential PAMs that would fly to the ISS. I can't go into any detail. Obviously, proprietary considerations exist related to these proposals, but it's very exciting, and I'm sure you'll hear more things released in the media associated with these items. And so ISS onboard resources and capabilities have been evaluated. We want to ensure that even though we want to enable these areas, that we're not going to impact the science that is continuing to happen on ISS. And so we do believe, based on our capabilities, that we can support today 2 short duration missions per year. And so we'll be looking to fund and enable approximately 2 10 to 30-day missions in the future to the ISS. Few reasons why we want to continue to do this. There's a number of benefits that we see private astronaut missions help in that LEO economy strategy. It allows commercial industry to purchase commercial services and gain insight into the costs associated with owning an operated platform. So it's kind of one of those first steps in getting us to a ISS replacement free flyer. It reduces market risk to these commercial LEO destinations, so to help them understand what the market is and helps demonstrate that market. It expands the range of commercial activities that can be performed on ISS that aren't just science and research related. And it potentially increases the flight rate, which strengthens that transportation market and hopefully, as Phil mentioned earlier, would reduce the costs. And then lastly, it potentially increases the availability of crew time on orbit for other items that maybe NASA could not have funded or could not have done under the ISS National Lab. There's now another area that can be requested by these private astronaut mission brokers, and they will have additional crew time that they will be able to offer to the LEO economy. So it does provide another area very quickly prior to having that free flyer that demand can also take advantage of. I think that's my last slide. With that, I think we're opening it up to questions and answers. And I'm going to hand that back over, I think, to Mike.
Thank you, Angela. Yeah, I want to thank Angela, Robyn, and Phil for a great panel. We only have time, I'm afraid, for one question, and this one came from a couple of different inputs on the Q&A channel. And this can go to anyone on the panel who wants to dive in. The prices for cargo flights went up from CRS-1 to CRS-2. How do you see the next competition driving prices down?
Yeah, since that was on my slide, I guess I'll take the first cut at that. You know, we're still pretty early, but we are going to have to move forward on those things if ISS is extended beyond the period of those 2 contracts. And we just need to signal and be serious about our desire for reducing those costs. So you put that in the evaluation criteria. That is going to be a key factor in our evaluations. And we also, it's not just up to industry, it's also up to NASA, right? I've seen how it's called requirements creep. We've seen that in a number of different programs where you just sort of, once you get a nice spacecraft and it's going well, it's kind of in our DNA at NASA. It's actually kind of a good thing. We always want something better, right? We always want to make it better, make it improved. When you're talking about commercial markets, better isn't always actually better. Sometimes cheaper is better. And if you have a service that's working and is reliable, sometimes you have to go against your nature and just say, hey, what's good enough? And also in terms of what's good enough, one of our main factors should be, I think, is reducing those costs. But we're going to have that debate within NASA about exactly what those procurements are and how those evaluation criteria are established, because there are important requirements that ISS is going to need from those crew and cargo vehicles. And we're just going to have to trade those against lowering costs. And it's going to be a discussion that we're going to have internally. What I'm saying is that I think before we've never had a strong voice that says, hey, lowering cost is super important. It's actually part of what we want to do, helps us, and it helps this overall LEO commercialization strategy. So we now have strong incentive to really push that as a major evaluation point.
Thanks again, Phil. And again, I want to extend my thanks to Robyn and Angela for an excellent panel. For those of you who we weren't able to get to your questions, we'll endeavor to, we have recorded those and we'll endeavor to get some answers to those posted as soon as we can. Thanks again, panel. We're now going to transition to the state of the ISS National Lab, our next panel. In 2005, Congress declared the International Space Station a U.S. national laboratory, with the stated intent to enable researchers to leverage the unique environment of the space station to support research with the capacity to benefit life on Earth. Since that time, the ISS National Lab has sponsored hundreds of research investigations, and under the management of CASIS since 2011, has built strong demand within the private sector for research, discovery-based research, as well as has enabled the activities of commercial facility partners, academic institutions, and other government organizations. Our next panel will discuss the next phase of growth for the ISS National Lab and where these efforts will be concentrated to focus on R&D activities that bring value to the nation and help build a sustainable, scalable market in low Earth orbit. I'd like to introduce our moderator for this panel. Most of you are familiar with his work. Jeff Foust writes about space policy, commercial space, and related topics for SpaceNews, and previously worked as a space industry analyst, web developer, and webmaster for the magazine. Jeff earned his PhD in planetary sciences from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and a bachelor's degree with honors in geophysics and planetary science from the California Institute of Technology. I turn it over to you, Jeff.
All right. Thank you, Michael. And good morning or good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Thanks for joining this panel about the state of the ISS National Lab. I think as many of you know, it's been a very active year for the ISS National Lab and its changing relationship with NASA. Just about a year ago, NASA commissioned an independent review of the ISS National Lab. And we saw the results of that report back in the spring with some recommendations for both NASA and for CASIS. So I'm going to introduce our panel from NASA and CASIS to talk about what's been going on, particularly in the last several months since that report came out, and what to look forward to in the months to come. First is Alex MacDonald. You saw Alex earlier in today's presentations. He is the chief economist at NASA. He is also the ISS National Lab program executive at NASA. He was previously the senior economic advisor from the Office of the Administrator and the founding program executive of NASA's Emerging Space Office in the Office of the Chief Technologist. He has a doctorate from Oxford University looking at the long-run history, the economic history, of American space exploration. Next will be Ken Shields. He is the Chief Operating Officer of CASIS. He's responsible for the day-to-day planning and execution of activities at ISS National Lab. He joined CASIS back in January of 2012 as the Operation Department Senior Project Manager. He has 25 years of experience in various aspects of project management, specialized logistics, and other areas. And then finally, we have Marybeth Edeen. She is the manager of the ISS Research Integration Office at NASA. That is the office responsible for enabling all the research and technology development on the ISS. That means dealing not only with NASA-sponsored and other government payloads, but also the commercial nonprofit use, which takes place at the ISS National Lab. With that, I'd like to get started. I'm going to start with Alex. In part because your title, ISS National Lab Program Executive, is one of the recommendations that came out of the report. So Alex, maybe explain what the ISS National Lab Program Executive does and how NASA's relationship with CASIS has evolved over the last year.
Yeah, so that's a great question to start with there, Jeff. Just want to make sure everyone can hear me all right. Excellent. Well, thanks. It's a pleasure to be chatting again here with the community at the ISS R&D conference. It's been an exciting year, and a year with some significant changes here now that we're beginning and we'll be seeing more of here over the months to come with respect to the National Lab. I will get into the question of the program executive, but I do want to take a quick step back and refer to some of the history that you were talking about there, Jeff, which is really the origins of the National Lab. It really began in the 2010 Authorization Act that really Congress basically prescribed that 50% of the resources of the space station should be used to achieve the objectives of the broader national community. That 50% of the resources of the space station would be used there to achieve NASA missions. And you've heard a lot about those NASA missions today, the SMD NASA missions, the exploration NASA missions, and now the commercialization NASA missions. But that 50% of the resources would be used for the missions of other institutions, of other government agencies, of commercial companies, of universities. And this is a really important principle. And the National Lab is really serving that mission. And over the last 10 years, we've been running essentially what amounts to an experiment in having a national lab in space that is open to a multitude of users. And last year, the administrator commissioned an independent review team to really look at how that's gone. And as you mentioned, there were a number of critiques, both of NASA's management of it, as well as some of the CASIS operations as well. And so one of the important findings, I think, is that the National Lab really has been very effective as a multi-user facility of a national lab. And this means a multitude of organizations can use the capabilities of the space station. And this is actually really important to understand, very different than actually what was envisioned back in 2010. Back in 2010, there was the idea of a model of an organization that would partner with NASA, that would become its own independent business, that might become self-sustaining. And what we've seen is that that's not really the right model. The really important model is the idea the nation will continue to have a national lab in space as a public service, as a multi-user facility that we're going to see through the rest of, obviously, the life of the space station. But we also hope that in the future, we might see a similar type of national lab arrangement on future platforms to enable other government agencies to keep using the research platform of a human space flight vehicle in space. So, as well as companies and academia, as I mentioned. So, what is the set of changes that we've been beginning to implement in order to ensure that we're going to have a robust future here and to respond to the changing environment of the last 10 years? Well, one of the first activities was to establish a program executive role. And we hadn't had that before. Basically, the strategic management of the National Lab was done as a kind of other duties as assigned position amongst the broader ISS team. And now we've recognized that this is a really critical part of the overall set of missions that the space station fulfills. In fact, it's a multi-$100-million enterprise when you add up the cost of the crew time, you add up the cost of the upmass. And so that really requires a dedicated program executive to work with the operating partner CASIS, to set the strategic goals, and to ensure the collaboration with the team at JSC, who, of course, actually manifests all the payloads onto the station. So that's one of the key recommendations. Another one was really to get new executive leadership and at the board level and at the executive director level. And I've been very pleased that the board of directors has really been very active in taking to heart those recommendations. We, in fact, have 4 really very highly qualified new board members who joined the CASIS board. And I very much look forward to working with them as they begin their formal search for a new executive director. So, as the program executive, we've been working with Ken and with Marybeth on a number of initiatives, and I'm just going to go through them really briefly, but Ken's leading up a number of them, and Marybeth's leading up a couple of them as well, so I'll let them go into detail. But just to hit them off here at the top, we are really basically going through our project proposal and evaluation processes for the National Lab, and really scrubbing them, making them much clearer. One of the critiques of the IRT was that they were a little bit opaque in some places, using some tools like economic, or I should say, value impact methodologies that weren't really clear, and not what the best practices were for us at NASA. So we've had an excellent team from NASA helping to work with CASIS on that. So that, Ken can go into that more in detail. Another area of critique was that we hadn't sufficiently coordinated with the biological physical sciences groups and the HRP groups as to their research and how the National Lab research can both kind of gain from those activities, but also not interfere with them. So we've actually established a working group with HRP and BPS and the National Lab, along with the leadership of the chief scientist, to help actually chart out roadmaps for all of our different research projects. Another key recommendation that we're going to be implementing in the months to come here, and Ken can fill us in on the specifics of that, is a user advisory committee. We have not actually had an external-facing user advisory committee taking an input about what the needs are of the community relative to the National Lab, and it was recognized that that's a really important step going forward as well. We're also going to be revising our cooperative agreement to establish new priorities, specifically in areas related to in-space production and applied R&D, to ensure that we're really building up sustainable demand for future platforms in LEO, and we're using the ISS to do the research that can enable us to do that, and also to emphasize our other government agency research, because in fact, actually, if you look at the last 10 years, other government agency research of the space station has been one of the most successful areas. We've had over $40 million of research funding for grants from the NSF and the NIH to use the National Lab platform. We also want to make sure that we're prioritizing commercial technology development, because that's been another key area. We've actually seen companies who have tested their technology on the ISS National Lab, who've then gone on to raise tens of millions of dollars in the private capital markets. In fact, one of them that really kind of spun out of an NIH grant, Emulate, was able to raise over $100 million after they received their project kind of proceed paperwork from CASIS. So we've seen a lot of success there. We want to build on that and increase the amount of private investment that we're seeing in microgravity applications. And then finally, a couple of other areas that Marybeth and Ken can talk to. We've kind of heard the concerns, the interests of the user community, the need for kind of pioneer allocation to facilitate the use of the National Lab by some of our commercial facility partners. And that's going to be something that we're going to be working on with them in the months to come. And then finally, we're also going to be kind of working with CASIS to outline the business lines by which people will be proposing new projects to ensure that there's clear and relevant evaluation criteria for all the new activities. So that's a lot there. And I know we got more to come from Ken, Marybeth, and we'll have some questions. But, bottom line is that, we've had 10 years of success, actually, with getting new users onto the station. We've had over 500 payloads through the National Lab, 70% of them coming from commercial users. And we're looking to build on that and really have a decade of kind of capitalization of the capabilities for the ISS through the National Lab in the decade to come here. So probably enough to start, and let Ken and Marybeth take it away.
All right. Thanks, Alex. Great overview. Ken, from the CASIS point of view, how have things changed? What are you changing? We've saw some references to changes to the board, a new user advisory committee, things like that. How are things changing on the CASIS end in response to this report?
Thank you, Jeff. That's a great question. And Alex, that was a great intro and overview of many of the things that we've been working on over the past several months. I'll tell you, one of the greatest changes, one of the most significant changes that I think we're undergoing right now is the partnership with NASA and the way that we work together. And we are really working diligently to understand where are there some significant overlaps where we can collaboratively, more efficiently, to ensure that we're optimizing and maximizing the use of the resources for the best return on investment and the best discoveries and the best applications that we can spin off of the ISS. We're also trying to identify and highlight where the differences are so that we don't necessarily waste time and have some opportunity cost in trying to work together where it doesn't make sense. So we're trying to establish those finer and cleaner lines of how this partnership more effective going forward. And thus far, it's been very, very positive direction. As an example, we've recently executed an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding, which clearly lays out some swim lanes and how we might collaborate with biological and physical sciences, the new BPS, as well as the ISS Program Office is one example. Some of the other areas that you touched on, or that Alex referenced in his overview, this acknowledgement that the National Lab on the ISS, it really is a multi-use facility that has such a vast array of users, both in organization types, but also in objective and intent of what they're doing on the ISS. We have some folks that are going to the ISS for very applied reasons, applied R&D or technology advancement, where they're getting pretty mature in TRL levels and hopefully getting to a point where they're potentially ready to spend something off of the ISS that maybe will create demand on other platforms or create new products and services and processes here on Earth. The other end of that spectrum is we have some fantastic discovery science, basic research. Alex referenced our partnership with interagencies like NIH and NSF. Their goals and objectives and why they use the ISS are very different than maybe the applied side or the commercial utilization side. So we've taken a very purposeful approach to having different proposal guidelines, for example, and different evaluation rubrics to take into account what those varied intents and varied purposes are for our vast number of users. Last thing I'll mention, and then I'll pass it on for any follow-up or perhaps have Marybeth join the conversation. But the establishment of this user advisory committee is extremely significant. We have in past years had advisory panels outside of CASIS, the Science Technology Panel being one, we call it STAP. But the user advisory committee will be have some more formality to it, and we're really now transitioning from the first many years here at CASIS of trying to create a lot of awareness, trying to reach out and do a lot of prospecting with where are the non-NASA use cases, because to the extent that we've tried to do it with the National Lab, it's never been done before. So to a certain degree, we had to do a little bit of megaphone awareness, and now we are morphing to a listening mode. And this user advisory committee and some other external stakeholders and advisors will play a key role in how we dive into these strategic priority areas like in-space production, commercial utilization, discovery science, technology development and demonstration, and lastly, certainly STEM education, educational outreach, workforce development. We're now moving into that listening mode, and we really will begin seriously reflecting what the users bring to that forum in the user advisory committee as others.
Right. Thanks, Ken. Appreciate that. Marybeth, we've been talking a lot about organizational changes and so on. How does this impact the actual research going on, the utilization of the facilities on the space station?
So in large part, first of all, can y'all hear me? Okay. In large part, the IRT recommendations don't really significantly change the day-to-day execution of getting research done on space station. What has really changed over the past few years is the continued move towards using commercial capabilities. Robyn mentioned the 17 commercial facilities on ISS. That's actually up to 21 now. And more NASA is moving away from government-built physical hardware and instead taking advantage of these commercial capabilities that have come to the fore because companies have found users through National Lab who want to do things in space. And we have found that those things are in line with research that NASA also wants to do. And so we have been taking advantage of that and buying access to those facilities instead of creating similar capabilities on the government side. We've been trying very hard not to compete in order to help promote those commercial capabilities while also meeting our government needs for research. While we in the ISS program completely understand the drive for commercialization of low Earth orbit and the need to have commercial facilities and commercial capabilities, commercial services available for the future, so that once ISS does end its lifetime to technological limitations, that there is more research to continue. We also are very critically important to continue research in the interim. While this last decade, you can kind of look at the first decade of ISS and consider that the decade of assembly, right? It took us about a decade to get everything assembled and built. And this last decade, from about 2011 on, has been the decade of research. We have done so much more research in the 2010s than we ever had done before, and it's been phenomenal. Kathy mentioned the numbers of researchers and numbers of investigations, and those continue to increase. At this point, yes, there is a lot of work going on to help commercialize low Earth orbit and create commercial capabilities and services. But those commercial capabilities have to be tempered with the need to continue to do the research that we've started in this last decade. We have to find those applications not just for commercial products and manufacturing, but also to meet NASA's needs for exploration, and to partner with, as CASIS has, the NSFs and NIHs and other government agencies to take full advantage of the microgravity environment and the low Earth orbit environment for Earth observation, and to be able to really tell what we can get from space, not just for NASA for exploration, but also for research across, the fundamental research and fundamental knowledge that Thomas Zurbuchen talked about. All those things have been worked in large part through the National Lab and through NASA, and we're continuing to try and facilitate that by using commercial capabilities where they're available, but also to continue the research and make sure that research stays as one of the primary focuses of this next decade.
All right, thanks, Marybeth. Alex, to go back to you, actually, this is a question that's come in from the audience. Let's go ahead and get to it now, because it's a pretty interesting question. There's been a lot of talk in the past about moving away, the idea of moving away from simple utilization of the ISS as a metric of success. As we go forward, as we move beyond sort of simple metrics like that, how do you gauge the success of ISS utilization, and in particular, the utilization, the effectiveness of the ISS National Lab?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? What does success look like? The old saying, if you don't know where you're trying to go, any path will take you there. So as we're charting this new path, where are we trying to go? I think there are maybe 4 really key metrics that I think we want to look for in the next 5 years. As we've talked about, the purpose of the National Lab is not to achieve NASA's missions, but to use the platform of the ISS to achieve the important missions of other institutions. And one of the most important sets of institutions that we really want to see using the platform of the ISS, and we hope future platforms in LEO, are other government agencies. As I mentioned, the NSF and the NIH have spent about $40 million in the past 5 years to fund researchers that use the platform of the ISS. I think an important metric, that's not just about utilization, is the extent to which they increase their funding of researchers to use the platform. I would hope that in the next 5 years, we might see as much as $100 million being funded by the NSF and the NIH, and maybe other organizations like Department of Commerce at NIST, potentially DoD as well. So I think that's one important metric. Another important metric is the amount of private funding raised by early stage startup companies who use the platform. As I mentioned, there are a number of companies who have already used the platform to demonstrate their technology, and then after that technology demonstration, have managed to raise funding. I'll give you another example in addition to the Emulate one. One of the ones that I hadn't really known a lot about until I took on the new role is a company called Launchpad Medical. And it's a really interesting company in the sense that they emerged through the MASS Challenge, which is essentially a startup accelerator program that is a partnership between the National Lab and Boeing. They were selected through the accelerator program, and they wanted to test out their bone adhesive technologies in microgravity to see how well it worked there. Well, after being able to demonstrate that technology on the space station, they were able to raise about $18 million to then take that product forward. We've had maybe about 4 companies that have had over $10 million raised after they've done flight experiments on the National Lab. I think over the next 10 years, we want to see that be well over 10 new companies that demonstrate the technology and raise over $10 million of private funding. A couple more here in terms of metrics. We've actually talked about it a fair bit. Came up in a question of Thomas, education. I actually think that the National Lab has a critically important role to play in stimulating education, not just in the K-12 kind of range, but also at the universities. I think there've actually been a lot of really successful programs on that have run through the National Lab. Storytime from Space, actually, especially in these times where a lot of folks are at home with kids, has received hundreds of thousands of views of our astronauts reading storytime books about STEM issues to children and to audiences of all ages as well. But we're also starting to see schools use the lab to do school experiments in space through organizations like the Quest Institute, Space Quest. So there's a lot of really interesting applications there. And I would hope that we see hundreds of thousands of more students be able to be engaged with actual science on the space station. And I hope that we're able to lay a new pedagogic foundation for microgravity research. And the National Lab has a critical role to play in that. And finally, the last key metric, and I think it's in some respects the most important one, is whether or not we actually can develop an application that is either made in space or regularly conducted on space as a science process that makes it into terrestrial supply chains. And the reason that that's a really important metric is because the number of applications that are produced in space and sold on Earth, or applications that are science processes in space that are regularly part of industrial science supply chains on Earth, the number of those we have on orbit right now is 0. We have a lot of data, we have a lot of science information, we of course have great industries for communications and remote sensing, but we don't yet have those key applications that are a regular part of terrestrial industry. And I think an important goal for the National Lab, and Marybeth really laid it out very well, right? We had the decade of construction, the decade of research. This has got to be the decade of capitalization. And to succeed in that, I think it's going to be really important to have, I hope, more than one, but I'll take just one application where we are making things in space on an annual basis or conducting science processes in space that are part of terrestrial science supply chains, because that has the potential to show that research in low Earth orbit has potential to transform terrestrial industries, and then that's something that we can build on for decades and, who knows, potentially centuries to come.
Right. Thanks, Alex. Ken, I'll ask a version of that question for you at CASIS. When you're evaluating research programs and proposals or so on, what sort of metrics are you using in measuring success in terms of advancing science and making the most possible use of the ISS National Lab resources?
Yeah, it's a great question, as Alex said, and a little continuation from some of his comments. I think in the initial years of CASIS in the National Lab, I think the primary objective really for everyone was to stand up a pipeline. Let's get utilization going. Let's get a pipeline of projects going. Let's develop a portfolio of varied disciplines and also varied types of users. And we've done that. And now perhaps we've actually gone a little bit too far. It's time to start evaluating performance and develop key performance indicators that are addressing the outputs of those utilization metrics now. For me, we like to evaluate proposals and consider the result. Are we going to get a patent from this? Are we going to get a new product? And we have examples in the portfolio now, after all these years, of companies like Procter & Gamble, who after years of research has developed, I think, about 10 patents from their ISS research. We also have companies that have actually matured from basic science into applied technologies in the area of medical devices through iterative science on the ISS. So I believe we should turn towards these, I'll call them more qualitative measures as to what the outputs are. What are the products? Utilization is still important. You know, we have to generate users to take advantage of this awesome asset and these fantastic resources that we have at our disposal. But now it's time to turn towards the actual output and generating important results that are of importance to the nation, that are going to make a difference to the tax all underwrites the cost of us operating this amazing laboratory. And we're doing that now. That's part of what we're working on now as part of this post-IRT effort, trying to pivot towards a whole different way of looking at what we want to generate through our program development. We're going to dive into things like advanced materials and very specifically looking at things like exotic fibers, semiconductor alloys, different types of applied R&D in advanced. What can be the outputs of them? Is it an in-space produced product? Is it a technology like we've done with companies like Made in Space and Nanorax and others, and these folks that are doing public-private partnerships on the ISS right now? So that would be my response to that and how we're moving forward.
Thanks, Ken. To Marybeth, we've been talking a lot about these advanced metrics and so on, but we still have the issue of resource allocations and utilization and so on. And you know, what challenges and what opportunities are you seeing trying to maximize the resource allocation for the ISS National Lab and the other users on the ISS?
Okay, thanks for that. So our most constrained resource to date has historically been crew time. With commercial crew coming to the forefront and the successful Demo 2 mission and hopefully the follow-on Crew 1 missions and the Boeing OFT missions shortly and CFT missions, we will be back up to 4 crew on ISS, hopefully forever. That will be a huge boon to research because that will double the research time we have available in a given week. What we have found, though, is then our biggest constraint becomes the type of cargo that we can get to orbit in the different vehicles. So then we're really hoping Sierra Nevada comes along quickly because they have unique capabilities. In the meantime, we continue to maximize the use of SpaceX and Northrop Grumman cargo vehicles and our HTV from the Japanese to get as much research to orbit as we can. It is a continual, I refer to it as a ping pong game of which constrained resource we're going to run into any given day of the week, and we balance that across everything as best we can. But crew time has always been, you know, the gorilla in the room. And with commercial crew coming on board, we're very, very excited to be able to hopefully double our research time. So we encourage our research community to think more about payloads that can be, you know, modified on orbit. Let the crew things that we can let the crew play around with a little bit and see if they can get something working. In these manufacturing payloads, we've been flying them up as you know, closed little boxes, and they try their thing, and if it doesn't work, we've had to bring the whole thing back down. We're hoping now to be able to focus some crew time on being able to troubleshoot and fix things on orbit or try a little bit different set of settings, or if it's a biological, be able to run it over the microscope, look at it and say, you know what, if I change the conditions this way, maybe I'll get better results. And trying to take advantage of that crew time to really run our research much more like a laboratory and be able to get instantaneous feedback from on-orbit diagnostic tools or on-orbit analysis tools, and be able to continue the research in a much more robust fashion with much more real time and continual feedback between the guys on the ground and the crew on orbit. So commercial crew, go, 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 is kind of our mantra right now.
Great. Yeah, we're all looking forward to that. For Alex, question, we've been talking a lot about low Earth orbit commercialization. We had the panel earlier. You had your own interview with the administrator earlier this morning. What role does the ISS National Lab play in this broader LEO commercialization role? What role are they going to play in terms of, stimulating the demand for LEO commercialization, LEO platforms, or other roles in sort of this broader effort?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's an area that's been evolving, and I think there's also been some kind of confusion in the past, as I said, kind of based on that 2010 pro-Orbis model that kind of set things off in a different direction than really where we've ended up. I think the role that the National Lab plays in commercialization is probably threefold. I mentioned in my last comments kind of one of the areas that I think is most important, which is developing new applications that can generate non-NASA revenue and ideally commercial revenue from making things in space or being part of terrestrial supply chains of knowledge in space. Doing the R&D to enable those things is part of the mission of the National Lab. It's not actually part of the mission of the National Lab to do that kind of commercial flights per se, because actually an important principle of the National Lab is that anyone who flies via the National Lab is essentially flying for free, because they are doing important work that is of value to the nation. If you're doing straight commercial work, like if you're doing a private astronaut mission, you actually go through the commercialization side of the house. And so, that's an important principle, that the National Lab's role is first and foremost R&D, but increasingly we're focusing on the types of R&D that can lead to commercial applications that get non-government and, more importantly, non-NASA revenue. A second critical part of how the National Lab fits into the overall commercialization kind of agenda is really that we have these commercial facility partners. As Marybeth mentioned, we're up over 20 at this point. And the way that works is we have these companies who have put often their own money into things, but often with NASA and with CASIS, National Lab money as well, to get these facilities on the space station. And then they have the ability to go out and generate their own customers. And this is really the distributed approach to generating more users. And it's been quite successful. Obviously, one of the successful areas has been CubeSat deployment, but it's also been in a lot of microgravity research areas as well. So by providing that kind of pipeline, by enabling commercial facilities to be on orbit, to enable those commercial partners to be able to essentially generate their own business, we're helping to build demand in that way as well. And then I think the third, and what may end up being one of the most important areas that the National Lab concept plays in the low Earth orbit economy, is this idea that in addition to there being a commitment by the nation to always have a human presence in low Earth orbit, NASA is really starting to come around to the idea that we may also need a national lab in orbit, indefinitely as well. We refer to it in our response to the IRT as a LEO national lab, which would mean that in principle, we want there to always be the capability for institutions across the nation to do their research in orbit. And that provides another source of anchor demand for future low Earth orbit platforms. In addition to achieving the NASA missions, we would like to establish the principle that the nation will also have an additional source of demand, which is this idea of a national lab. Certainly that's a critical part of our use of the ISS, But I think it really, if we can demonstrate its value successfully over the next 10 years, I think we've got a great start with the last 10 years. But if we can really prove that out, I think that'll be a critical source of demand for future platforms.
Thanks. Audience question actually for Ken. Want some more details about the User Advisory Committee and how they're going to help the ISS National Lab leadership on future R&D?
Yeah, sure. Love to share what our plans are there. And in general, many of these transformation activities, as we've dubbed them, we've really taken a sense of urgency to get these things done. So the things you hear us talk about, the User Advisory Committee, the evaluation criteria, the new Pioneer allocation for the commercial service providers, those are things that are going to be implemented in the new fiscal year. So these are things that we have acted with some real urgency. With the User Advisory Committee, we envision that standing up initially with 5 subcommittees covering discovery science, applied R&D with a focus for in-space production. We'll have STEM education and education outreach involved there, as well as technology demonstration. And lastly, the commercial service provider allocation or commercial utilization. And the idea there is to provide a forum for users to provide feedback on their feelings as far as the most effective use of the resources, provide feedback on perhaps areas of focus or areas of priority that we should work on. It will provide a forum where we can stand up ad hoc working groups, ad hoc science group, ad hoc technology groups, perhaps to help us with things like science road mapping, to get to clearly identified endpoints by using the ISS. Our goal is to have the committee stood up perhaps in late September, certainly mid-October. I would let everyone know that in September we will have a web portal that opens up where we will have an opportunity for users to upload their names as candidates to be members of the committee. So this is happening in the very, very near future, and we are super excited here at CASIS to have the help and advice out to the executive director at CASIS, and the executive director will share that information, that advice as appropriate to management staff here, the board, certainly the NASA program executive, and other stakeholders who will help us to continue to make certain strategic decisions as we move forward.
All right. You mentioned this concept of a Pioneer allocation. I wanted to see if you could elaborate on what that is and how that will be allocated.
Certainly. The Pioneer allocation, we're now acknowledging that these public-private partnerships, these companies who have set up operations on the ISS, made significant investments in capital, time, and resources to be the pioneers of creating these new business opportunities in LEO and specifically on the ISS. It's now time for us to recognize that these companies need a dependable, consistent, and a set portion of resources to manage and run their businesses. After all, how can they go out and generate the demand? How can they generate capital investment? How can they generate all the things that you are required to sustain business, sustain an ongoing concern or ongoing venture? And so we are going to have this subset of the National Lab allocation, certain amounts of upmass, certain elements of different types of asset resources, on-orbit resources that each one of these companies rely on to operate their businesses. And it's not just taking advantage of microgravity. We also have folks who have external facilities taking advantage of the extreme environments of space. What they need in the way of resources is different, for instance, someone who maybe operates an incubator or a microscope in space station. So the types of resources and the way they're allocated is going to be different for each company, and very much based on what their needs are to run their facilities, and in some ways based upon what their demand pipeline looks like. We're going to go through the process. It's going to be well vetted externally of CASIS to make sure that we are, in fact, putting in the processes and the right types of resources that will help these companies.
All right. We're just about out of time for our panel, so I wanted to provide one final question for all three of our distinguished panelists. I know it's 2020, and so our crystal balls are all either very cloudy or shattered at this point in time. But I wanted people to look forward, out at least the next several months, maybe out through the end of the year or beyond, in terms of what you see as the next big opportunities in terms of the ISS National Lab and the research and utilization of the station. So Alex, let's start with you.
Well, sure. Yeah, I think one of the most exciting pieces, of course, is our Crew 1 flight. We're going to get more astronauts up there to enable more research. Increasingly, I've actually become even more of a fan of the cargo flights in a certain way. Because one of the great joys of this new role for me has been working with the team at CASIS and at JSC to figure out how we're going to pack the car for the space road trip. It turns out it is a very interesting game of Tetris to get all of the dozens of different payloads all into a relatively constrained space for our, the Northrop Grumman flights of cargo and for the SpaceX cargo flights as well. So I'm actually looking forward to all those cargo flights, because that's how we get our research up. That's how we get the payloads up there. And, that's actually where the rubber meets the road in terms of priorities and the challenges, which payloads are ready. So, I would say the NG-14 there and the SpaceX 21 cargo flights are actually going to be a highlight for me here coming up. And then really just this ability to have more crew time on orbit. I can't really emphasize enough. It's actually a great point for me to end on there to foot stomp what Marybeth was saying there, that we're really going to be hoping to move to what we hope will be a different paradigm for the next decade here on the space station, and the steps we're going to take to get there are going to be happening here in the coming months to really allow us to do more on-orbit diagnosis and on-orbit iteration for the payloads, to allow the crew to help achieve the objectives of some of these companies in terms of very complex in-space production challenges and very complex science problems, to allow the crew to get engaged with that and to provide them the tools to do that. Because we've really, due to the limitations of crew time, really had to treat a lot of these things as black boxes, and where crew turns it on and turns it off and isn't able to really use that human expertise to make some of those fundamental findings. I think that's a really important shift that can really be transformative, and I think it's a key transformation for us to be working on here that we're going to be starting on in the coming months. I look forward to doing that and to seeing what comes. Great.
Ken, what's in your crystal ball?
My crystal ball, similar to Alex's, he stole my thunder a little bit there. I'm looking forward to the technological advances that are catalyzed by having this additional crew time. I think that our commercial service providers who are now on orbit are going to now be motivated to come up with a new approach so that we can do a lot more volume of science and a lot more iterative science and technological advancement on station as a result of having these additional crew time hours available to work on the science. I think we're going to be in some ways pushed and forced into that direction, and I think that's a great thing. I think that's how we advance results. I think that's how we advance the output, which gets back to our earlier discussion about what are really performance indicators and what does success look like? And I think it's outputs. And so I think with the advent of commercial crew, it's going to be huge, not only with the extra crew time hours, but also we've got some enhancements on what we can bring to station, what we can bring back on those vehicles. So I can't say how excited we are to get into this new era. I've always said over these past several years, there's never been a better time to do science and R&D and technology in space. Next year, the rest of this year, it's actually going to get better. So things are evolving for vast advancements in every area, every discipline that we support.
All right, and finally, Marybeth, what are you looking forward to?
So I think very similar to what Alex Ken said, when I started working in the research world about a decade ago, station was woefully underutilized, and our goal was always to have a line out the door. We've gotten there. The line is more than out the door. the line is long, and there are a lot of people who want to do things on space station, and want to use it for such a wide variety of uses. The challenge is going to continue to be to manage that queue of people. And what I see is that challenge getting more and more complicated as time goes on with the huge variety of users. So with that, I'll finish up and just say I'm looking forward to continuing to have a very hard job for the next decade.
All right. Well, thank you to Marybeth and to Ken and Alex for this panel to give us a look at what is going on the ISS National Lab and what to look forward to. And with that, I'll hand it back over to Michael as we get ready for the next sessions of the conference. Thanks.
Thank you, Jeff. I want to thank Jeff for moderating an excellent panel and each of our panelists. And to echo a few of the comments that Marybeth made, now in the time of COVID, we are all familiar with how to join lines that go out the door and maintain a safe distance. So we look forward to doing that in the future.